With this build, you are pretty much unkillable by having 0 CD on Debilitating Roar. You do very good single target damage as well. As you can see from the clips, this is a hybrid werewolf werebear build. We will be using Shred as the main core skill. We will build around Shred, making it hit as hard as possible. The next big thing for the build is having 0-second CD on Debilitating Roar, so you can pretty much tank a huge wave of mobs no problem. But I'm going to be honest, this build probably doesn't clear mobs as fast as the pulverized builds, but which build does. I do think this build is pretty fun to play, spamming roars and tanking everything, on top of which you are healing a lot from Shred. And your movement speed with the build is pretty fast as well. I am pretty much able to do Nightmare Dungeons about 10-15 levels above my level. But yeah, here's some gameplay footage before we get into the build. So for helmet, we're going with Aspect of the Protector. I feel Barrier is pretty strong and this build doesn't really need specific helm aspect, so we're just putting a defensive aspect on it. But yeah, generally Barrier I think is just really good. But do ignore the stats on my helmet for a bit, except maybe life. I'm probably gonna switch this helm out for a helm with maybe critical strike damage and probably damage while shapeshifted. So if you're going this build, look for those helms, since I believe it has come out that resistance are not that important. And for the chest, of course, Mad Wolf's Glee. So you will always be in werewolf form and +2 ranks to all werewolf skills. Since our core skill is Shred, we definitely want 2 ranks in that, and then we also use Rabies with Howl, so Mad Wolf's Glee is giving us a lot of value here. And also the stats are not too bad. All the 4 stats are relevant to the build. Physical damage, poison damage, and damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. And then for the gloves, I have Stormclaw's aspect on it. Critical strikes with Shred deal 20% of the damage dealt as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. This basically just adds more damage to Shred. Although we're not lightning build, this does do quite a bit of work. And for gloves, you always try to look for the ranks for the core skill that you use. So for this, we have +3 in Shred. I haven't found one with +4 yet, but if I do, I will try to put that in. And then in this build, attack speed is important. The more attack speed you have, the faster Shred goes off, since Shred does 3 attacks. So attack speed greatly beneficial for Shred first, second, and third attack to go off, as well as for your basic attack, you generate resource faster by attacking faster. But probably the biggest stat for this build is critical strike chance, so you definitely want that on your gloves. And then the next thing you would probably want is critical strike damage. I couldn't get it for this glove, but a second choice would be the lucky hit chance to restore 90% of primary resource. That is not bad as well. But mostly you want critical strike damage for this. And moving on to the pants. So for the pants, you can also go Disobedience. that might actually be better. I will probably switch to that. But right now I have protecting aspect on my leggings. This usually saves my butt when there's a lot of ranged units. It gives me a little bit more time to survive against them. And for the stats, you're looking for ranks into rabies. And then I went with damage reduction for enemies that are poisoned, since most of your enemies will be poisoned from rabies or your shred. And then damage reduction while fortified. There's going to be 0 CD on your debilitating roars, so you are going to have a lot of fortify up most of the time. And then I went with total armor percentage. And for the boots, I went with Wind Striker. Every time you crit, you gain movement speed for up to 6 seconds. In this build, you're critting most of the time, so it's a big plus just gaining that movement speed every time when you're fighting. And of course, for the stats, must have is movement speed, and definitely try to get a willpower stat in your boots. And I have plus 15 to all stats, and fortified generation is honestly not really that important. You're probably better off finding something other than that. But for gems for the gear, I just went with max life, ruby gem for all slots. For the weapon, I went with blurred beast aspect. While dashing, shred seeks out nearby poisoned enemies, instantly dealing that damage to those enemies. Just imagine your third shred poison damage is 100 damage that's ticking over time, and it's still on the enemy. When you use shred again, the first dash will proc that damage, and it will proc 180 damage without consuming the poison itself. So the first 100 will still tick down, and you do additional 180 damage to the enemy. This is probably the biggest damage booster to our core skill, so we definitely have to have this aspect on it. This works similar to Changeling's Depth, where when you use a Werebear skill, you can do like 300% damage proc on the target, but unlike Changeling's Depth, Blurred Beast doesn't consume the poison, so that's a big plus for the build because of the paragons we will take, such as having 3 poison enemies around you increases your damage by 45%. So this works much better instead of Changeling's Depth. But yeah, for the stats, you're looking for critical strike damage, willpower, and I also went with critical strike damage with werewolf skills, so I'm getting like 100, almost 120 critical strike damage just from the weapon. And then I have damage over time on it for the first stat, but something like core skill damage, 40% to core skill damage is probably better than damage over time. And then for the amulet, we went with accelerating aspect. Critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by 29%. So like I said, attack speed is probably maybe the third most important stat for the build. The more attack speed you have, the faster shred goes off. And you generate more spirit with your basic attack as well, because you're attacking faster basically. So I feel like this is another important aspect to have. And for the amulet stats, I went with plus 3 ranks with quick shift passive. So quick shift passive is when a shapeshifting skill transforms you into another form, it deals 35% increased damage. When we are auto attacking with our basic skill, which is a werebear skill, when you transform into a werewolf by using shred, it is increased by 35%. So currently I have that on my amulet, but you are better off looking for envenom, because I've seen amulets with envenom also. I just haven't had it drop for me yet. So envenomous poison enemies take additional critical strike damage, so that is really good for the build, so you probably should look for that in your amulet. And for the stats, I went with the 8.8% damage, more damage reduction from close enemies, and this is probably a preference thing, but I went with movement speed, because I do like to move really fast around the map, but I think this is a preference thing, and you could look for more damage in your amulet. And then for the ring, okay, this is another big core item for the build, Hunter's Zenith. This is what basically just gives 0 CD on the debilitating roar. Well, it depends. You can either use debilitating roar or trample as a free skill, which gives no CD. After you kill a mob with a werewolf skill, which you will mostly be doing a lot, because shred is your core skill. Either that or some will die from rabies, so yeah, you're getting a lot of resets on these 2 skills. So yeah, the unique basically states, gain a bonus when you kill with a shapeshifting skill. Your next, for werewolf skill, your next non-ultimate werebear skill costs no resources and has no cooldown. And this has no timer on it. So after you kill something with shred, after one group of mobs, you will have that little werebear icon on you, which I will show you on the screen right now. If you have that icon on you, you can use debilitating roar and it will have 0 CD. As in, it won't go down in cooldown. So you get that icon after you kill something with werewolf skill. So you can either choose debilitating roar or trample. So in this build too, you are kind of hard to CC. If you ever get stunned, you can just use trample, kill something. If that mob stuns you again, you can use trample again to get out of it. And then of course there's another side to the unique. And if you kill something with a werebear skill, your werewolf skills heal you for 900 HP when damage is first dealt. So this is just a bit of a bonus. Sometimes you do kill something with your basic attack, which is maul, and you do get extra heal when you use shred afterwards. So that's a tiny bonus, but the main thing we want is the no CD on debilitating roar or trample. So for the stats, you can't really change unique stats, but 3 of the stats we definitely use with damage while shapeshifted, critical strike damage with werewolf skills, and then the quick shift passive again. Unfortunately, we lose out a bit on the overpowered damage with werebear skills here. And for the last ring, we went with unsatiated aspect. So after killing an enemy with shred, your next werewolf skill generates more spirit and deals 30% increased damage. So again, you can choose when to use this. After killing something with shred, you can use shred again to power it for 30% damage, increased damage. Or you can use rabies to do 30% more damage with rabies. Or this is probably the most inefficient choice, but you can also use blood howl to generate more spirit, since we will be having innate blood howl passive to generate more spirit with it. But it's probably better to use either the damage boost for shred or rabies. And now for the boons, we go Gift of the Stag, maximum spirit. We don't really need the 10% reduced damage from elites, I feel like, since we will have roar up most of the time, as well as advantageous beast, since we can use trample a lot to break out of crowd controls. And then we take 2 in deer, of course critical strike chance and then critical strike damage. And for wolf, we're going with energized, dealing damage, has up to 50% chance to restore 10 spirit. Just a little boost to have more spirit to use shred. And for snake, and the only choice, which is critical strikes, heal you for your maximum life. We do hit a lot of critical strikes, so this is pretty useful. And now for the skill points. Okay, for the basic skill, I went with maul, and I went with fierce maul. I just wanted to increase the radius of the maul attack. I feel like I didn't really need the stun for anything. But yeah, the main reason for going hybrid is we want our key passive to proc, which is Bestial Rampage. So 20% attack speed for being a werewolf for 2.5 seconds, 20% increased damage for being a werebear for 2.5 seconds. That's the main reason I really wanted the attack speed from being a werewolf for this build, since attack speed is really important for the build. Anyway, for the core skill is Shred. We definitely max this out, and I have almost 11 with the equipment. And for the passive, this is probably a must, Raging Shred. The third combo attack is larger and applies an additional 82% poisoning damage over 5 seconds. This is huge. A lot of the damage comes from here. And we are mainly a poison build, so yeah, we definitely take this. And of course we take Predatory Instincts, all 3 points. And then again, this is a preference thing. I like to move fast, so we take the 9% movement speed while in werewolf form, and it persists for 3 seconds after you leave it. On top of that, we are mostly in werewolf form because of our chest piece, so I would say this is a pretty good take. And I think I just had 1 point in Iron Fur because I had 1 point lying around. You could take this if you still want more damage reduction, but I feel like I'm already tanky enough. And then for defensive skills, we're taking Blood Howl and Roar. For Roar, we are taking Preserving Debilitating Roar. Don't really need the slow, and I could use more heals from this also. So yeah, the build gets a lot of heals from this, the Howl, from Shred. But yeah, we've already went through this. For Howl, we went for the Spirit Generation. You could also take the attack speed, honestly. But I feel like this usually helps me out when I'm in a pinch. I need that little extra spirit to kill something off. And we take 3 points in Vigilance. We're pretty much spamming Roar, so this is up all the time. And then next we skip all companions. Of course we take Trample. Alright, and then we only have 1 point in Roar because we don't really need more cooldown reduction, right? Ranking it up only gives more cooldown reduction, but we don't need that since we have 0 CD on Roar, so you just need 1 point in it. But yeah, next skill is Trample, 1 point in Trample. And we also take Spirit Generation with it. Since I feel like we already have enough Fortify when we're spamming Roar, don't really need to fortify. But when we're spamming trample to get our CC, you get that extra bit of spirit, so you can spam shred more. And then we max out rabies. This is our only form of wave clear for large mob groups. So we max that out and we're getting almost 11 from our equipment again. And I definitely took natural rabies so that it spreads faster. I still think this is much better than taking the 4-second. They take damage faster, but if you don't take natural rabies, the spread is really slow. And I feel like you need this. And then we max out toxic claws. Critical strikes with werewolf skills poison the enemy for 20% damage of the base damage. We are critical striking a lot, so this is a must take. This is a lot of damage. And of course we take Envenom. And like I said, try to get more ranks in Envenom in your amulet if you can. Poison damage. Poison enemies take additional critical strike damage. Very good. Passive is a must. And then we take quick shift because we do shapeshift a lot every 2.5 seconds so that our key passive goes off. So we get some value from here. And I also maxed out heightened senses, more damage reduction. So by now we're pretty darn tanky, considering all the roars and all the other damage reductions. Okay, now I just want to quickly go over the paragons. So for the first glyph, I went with exploit glyph. So one weakness of the build is it has no vulnerable in any of the skills. So we definitely need this glyph. This is like a must-have glyph, because I think every build needs vulnerable because it's just another damage multiplier. So the first thing you do is just get exploit glyph. And of course get the required dexterity on the sides. And then the next board I went into is Lust for Carnage. Okay, this is up to you. You can also go for Heightened Malice first. That would also be really good. But I just wanted the Ferocity rare node here right beside the Lust for Carnage. So I went with Lust for Carnage first. And also it was easier to get the glyph socket here since it had Feral rare node 20% werewolf skill damage, while Heightened Malice only had Sinking Fangs, which was damage to poisoned enemies. And then for the glyph, I went with Fang and Claw. While in Werewolf or Warbear form, close enemies take 12% increased damage. I actually wanted to put this glyph on my second board, but I just didn't have enough dexterity, so the glyph is Spirit, which increases your critical strike damage with core skills, so this is really important. That's the third glyph you get. To insert this glyph, I went for the Thunderstruck board because it had enough dexterity to put this glyph in, and it was close to more critical strike damage node like Deluge, and as well as the magic nodes had critical strike damage, so I went for Thunderstruck node, though we're not going lightning damage. But yeah, before that third board, I kind of grabbed Heightened Malice. It was just a lot of damage boost. It was a big damage boost for when fighting a pack of mobs, but it is pretty circumstantial. You do need 3 mobs around whatever to be poisoned for that damage to go off. So in boss fights, this usually is not up. That's the only bad thing about Heightened Malice. But when you have rabies on a pack of mobs, this hits like a truck. So yeah, for legendary nodes, I just went with Heightened Malice and Lust for Carnage. The other legendary nodes you could possibly take is Inner Beast, since we do shapeshift a lot, but the rare nodes on it require a lot of dexterity, and I'm not sure if I can reach 540 dex on this build. Maybe at a higher level I could. That's why instead I just went with Lust for Carnage, because I definitely have the stats to get the bonus for the rare nodes. But yeah, that's it for Paragons. So before I do sign off on the build, I do want to go over some tips and tricks for the build, such as skill rotations, because this build does require some attention, because you need to be in werewolf form for 2.5 seconds and werebear form for 2.5 seconds, and the most efficient way to do that is usually using shred twice. So when you get shred off twice, that should be enough for 2.5 seconds that you're in werewolf form to get the attack speed bonus. And then for me, with all my attack speed, it usually takes maybe 3 or 4 attacks with Maul to get the werebear passive off, the key passive off, which is 2.5 seconds again. So my rotation usually is 4 basic attacks followed by 2 shreds. and that's usually enough to proc the key, both sides of the key passive. But of course this depends on the situation. Sometimes I would try to get 3 shreds off. So you can try to mark skill order that way, so you don't really have to look for the icon above your skill bar, so that you know you have that to know if the key passive is procced or not. And for the 0-second cooldown on werebear skills, I guess you do have to kind of pay attention to the little icon, but it is definitely easier to see than the key passive icon. But you can also mostly guess from a mob dying just from your shred, so you can just only pay attention to that and then use roar accordingly. Although one thing to know, you don't get the cooldown proc if you killed a summoned enemy unit. Only normal mobs give the passive proc. So the build will be a bit awkward for the first hour or two, but once you get used to it, it feels great. So don't give up on it just cause it feels a bit clunky at first. You get used to it pretty quick. Anyway, yeah, that's all for the build. So I will have the build link in the comment and description below. You can check out the full build there. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the build. I've had a blast with it. Just having 0-second cooldown on roar is just fun to use. Oh, another little tip is when you see a mob charging up for the big attack like a stun, you can use roar to interrupt that. They stop the channel of that skill. But yeah, that's another little tip. But yeah, enjoy guys, and let me know in the comments below of what you think of the build. And of course, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. I'll do a lot more of these builds. Well, fun builds. I feel like the most efficient builds are done by most of the other YouTubers, so I'll try to do some fun builds. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. See you guys soon. Bye bye.